Hello, welcome back to the channel. We're taking a third little peek at the first trans MP here in the UK, Dr Jamie Wallis, MP for Bridgend. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about his political ambitions. So let's get into it. So to understand the political journey that Dr Jamie Wallis has been on, I think we need to understand a little bit about his father, Dr Daryl Hamilton-Wallace. Spells it in slightly different ways in certain places, which is interesting, but I have double checked everything that I'm going to say, so I know that I am correct. So the first thing I want to talk about is fox hunting. So the UK, there's a traditional British country sport where, as Oscar Wilde said, the unspeakable are in pursuit of the uneatable. Fox hunting has been banned in the UK since 2004. That is when the Hunting Act, which was brought in under the last Labour government, came in banning the hunting of live mammals with dogs. But it was also tied up with a lot of identity issues. So I would say it was one of the first big culture war events to happen in our political system. Now, one of the big divides in British society is between town and country. So people in urban environments don't really understand what it's like for people that grow up in the countryside and vice versa. Some people in the countryside were quite traditional and quite attached to the traditions involved in hunting, considering it a good way of getting exercising their horses, dealing with vermin which would otherwise threaten livestock, a good bonding experience for the participants. Other people in the countryside felt that it was a real imposition of people who were generally posher, more wealthy landed gentry who would basically just go anywhere they wanted, which could be over a field, it could be over your garden, it could be anywhere, and they felt that was like a demonstration of the fact that they were they were cementing their status. And so there was a resistance to it from a lot of people in the countryside, as well as there were a lot of people that were for it. And in the cities, in contrast, we have much less contact with wildlife. So, when we see an urban fox, which a country folk would have no qualms about seeing as vermin because they're going to kill your chickens, in the city, people put food out for foxes. We love seeing foxes. We regard them as one of the only species of wildlife which can thrive in the urban environment. So we feel very affectionate about foxes, and we in the cities have been traditionally much more opposed to fox hunting. So when the whole hunting thing was debated, there was this divide between country and town, but there was also a divide between people in the country, between although hunting was actually people of all classes did it, but it was generally perceived as a culture war between the posh and the less posh. So that was very interesting. So the Labour government pushed that through. There was big resistance in the Lords. They used some weird parliamentary mechanisms to overcome that resistance and push this law through to outlaw banning hunting with hounds. That was good as far as a lot of us were concerned. For other people who live in the country, perhaps people that kept chickens and saw, came out and saw 5 of their chickens all killed by the fox that then left them there, and they felt very angry about it. They still wanted to control their fox population, and maybe they felt that hunting was a solution. I cannot see how it can possibly be the most humane way to deal with that situation. So, you know, whereas I will accept that there are circumstances in which it might be necessary for somebody to shoot a fox because otherwise they are threatening their livestock, I just don't think it's acceptable to chase down a fox with a load of hounds. So, Dr Daryl Hamilton-Wallace is of the opposite opinion, and in fact, as a keen hunter, actually ran a drag hunt called the Llynfi Vale Drag Hunt. Now, drag hunting has always, it's always been around, and drag hunting is where you get a scent and you literally infuse something with the scent, and then you drag that around, and then you get your pack of foxhounds, which need to be your beagles, because they need to have exercise, they need to be kept fit, and they're not pets, they're not kept as pets, they're kept in big kennels, maybe 80 beagles in a kennel together, baying and having a great time, rolling about with each other. You need to run them. So they would get this scented thing and they would drag it across the countryside, and then the hounds would be expected to chase that scent. And then I'm assuming that at the end of it, they would get some kind of reward, a kind of positive reinforcer. So anyway, so drag hunting was suggested as a way that country people could maintain their traditions without causing this insult to the wild mammalian population in the countryside. However, what happened in effect was that people would use this rule around drag hunting to kind of accidentally, on purpose, find a fox at some point while they were doing a drag hunt, and then, oops, we've accidentally ended up chasing and killing a fox, which is totally illegal. And it has been difficult for people who are animal rights activists, hunt saboteurs, and other people who are concerned members of the countryside population. It has been difficult for them to collect evidence sufficient to mount prosecutions when the hunts have resumed their illegal hunting activities. It's a whole off-topic thing. Stick with it. So Daryl Hamilton-Wallace, spelt two different ways, sometimes hyphenated, sometimes not. He set himself up as running this Llynfi Vale drag hunt. I have no access online to anything that tells me how many times they've run drag hunts, where they've run drag hunts, how many foxes, how many hounds they've got, how many hunters have hunted with them. Can't find out anything, it's all private. So he ran this drag hunt called the Llynfi Vale Drag Hunt. Now, off the back of that, he then put himself forward as an expert witness, so that when people were taken to court for having broken the hunting ban, and in the very, very rare circumstances where sufficient evidence was submitted that the CPS chose to proceed with a prosecution against the hunt, he has put himself forward as an expert witness for the hunt. Anyway, his reputation precedes him, as you can see from the screenshots that I'm sharing with you right now, where there are two different examples of trials where he has appeared as an expert witness. And in both of those reported trials, his reputation as somebody who's prepared to perjure himself even is openly discussed. So it's not just drag hunts that Dr Daryl Hamilton-Wallace is purported to be an expert witness in. I have to thank RIP 4X Nutmeg for this, because it's due to her write-up in the Glinner Update that I realised I'd missed this in the exact same websites that she'd looked at, so thank you. He also sets himself up as an expert witness in the field of what he describes as child pornography. There is no pornography involving children. There are images of the abuse of children, and there is image-based child sexual exploitation. Just wanted to clear that up. Expert witnesses should be aware of that. So he sets himself up as an expert witness in this field, and the basis of this expertise is that he can use his software and his company to inspect the hard drives of people accused of the possession of image-based child sexual abuse. And he can then determine whether or not they downloaded these images purposefully, or whether or not they just accidentally appeared on their computer when they were engaged in downloading some other form of pornography that was perfectly legal and acceptable. He claims that due to his involvement, over half of the people accused of image-based child sexual exploitation have failed to be convicted. These are people that the FBI knows have these images on their computers. They frequently have a history of indecency. So it's interesting to note that the police were initially trusting the company to do an inspection of the hard drives of the accused in order to ascertain whether or not they had intentionally downloaded these images. And then at some point that stopped, and we don't really understand why. We could hazard a guess. My opinion of Dr. Daryl Hamilton-Wallace, having never met him, is not positive. And add to all of this the stuff we know about the business empire from the other day when I made the video about the second look at Jamie Wallis. So, Dr. Hamilton-Wallace does not like to be criticised. Neither does Jamie Wallis. There is a blog written by a man called Andy Butler who seems to have had a run-in with the Wallis family. Now, I believe that what happened was Andy Butler runs a data recovery business, and he thought that it would be a good idea to get in contact with these local business people who also ran data recovery businesses, because he was hearing that they weren't able to always recover the data from the devices that people were sending in. So he genuinely got in touch with them to say, if you're struggling to get the data out of these devices, I can help. Why don't we work together? You could send some stuff to my labs and I would be able to work on it and get the data of it for our clients. They didn't like it. He reports that he was threatened by Dr. Daryl Hamilton-Wallace. He also claims to have been visited by an enforcer. This then resulted in a fall of about 25 feet, resulting in a concussion, fractures to his vertebrae, a partial stroke, and ongoing problems with his discs. Serious injuries. Serious injuries. It sounds absolutely dreadful. So he reports that this enforcer is somebody that was working in defence of the interests of Dr. Daryl Hamilton-Wallace. So who do we know that's associated with this family who would or could be described as a violent enforcer? Well, let's take a look at a bloke called Gordon Lewis. You can see that Gordon Lewis is still very much involved in the local Conservative Party in Bridgend, where in fact he is still listed as the chairman of the local Conservative Party. He has also acted as the election agent for Dr. Jamie Wallis. Now, Gordon Lewis is an associate of Dr. Daryl and Dr. Jamie Wallis. He actually acted as Jamie Wallis's election agent in the December 2019 election that saw him return to Westminster as the MP for Bridgend. Gordon Lewis is not a nice man. He threatened his own son with a knife and was convicted for it. Now, there appears to be like a Wallis nexus in this area. What I mean about the political ambitions of this family is that their friends and family are associated with various town council positions. So let's look at the electoral success of the Wallis family and their associate, Gordon Lewis. So I did a little timeline. So Jamie Wallis in 2016 was put forward as the Conservative candidate in a by-election for the constituency of Ogmore, which is a constituency like adjacent to Bridgend. It's not an uncommon practice that somebody wants to be an MP and so they do like a trial run in a seat that they're not likely to win. So Ogmore has always been Labour, so it wasn't likely to turn blue. So, but, you know, he lost that election. So in 2017, so that's the next year, he then was elected to Pencoed Council. So that was a local council, so dealing with, you know, bin collections and all that kind of stuff, in a place called Hendry, so Hendry Ward. So the next year, in 2018, he was actually sacked from that position, and it did make the papers. He was sacked for completely not bothering to turn up to anything for over 6 months. So from at least February in 2018, so he was elected in May 2017 and he just stopped turning up by February. So that's what, 7 months later. So when Jamie Ward resigned from Pencoed Council, he claimed that it was because he'd taken up a seat on another council, another local council called Cowbridge Council. Now, I haven't found any evidence of the election result that gave him a seat on that council. It's possible that he was co-opted onto that council because there was a casual vacancy from a resignation. I have sent off a Freedom of Information request with all sorts of cheeky questions in it, so it'd be interesting to follow up in about 6 weeks to find out what has happened as a result of that. But anyway, I was able to find a whole list of committees on Cowbridge Council that Dr Jamie Wallis either was present for or gave apologies for his absence from. So that's evidence that he was definitely serving as a councillor on that council, and he says that he kept that seat going until he gave it up in order to fight the election in 2019. The earliest committee that I can find evidence for him being on in Cowbridge is in May 2018. Then later that year, Gordon Lewis, the enforcer guy, the threatened to stab his own son guy, he was elected for the same ward at the same council. And it was interesting to me that he was elected uncontested. Nobody stood against him. Well, you wouldn't, would you? The guy sounds an absolute beast. I wouldn't stand against him. I'd be keeping well clear. I wouldn't answer the door to him if he came round. Well, he didn't need to do any campaigning because no one stood against him. So he just got elected on the nod. So he got elected 2018. So then the next year, Jamie Wallis put himself forward as the Conservative candidate for Bridgend. So that was a constituency with still a Labour MP, but a smaller majority, so much more likely to win that one. And indeed, he did win that election with a small majority, 1,000 votes. And then the next year, 2020, this Gordon Lewis, he resigned from this Pencoed Council, Hendry Ward. So there's this whole hoo-ha of people getting elected and having to resign, or being asked to resign, or just deciding to resign. And it makes me wonder, what did the Register of Interests say for Gordon Lewis when he was on Pencoed Council, and for Jamie Wallis when he was on Pencoed Council. Oh, and he also had a stint on another council, Cowbridge Council, which he was on for about 5 months in between getting sacked from Pencoed Council and standing for election for Bridgend. He had to go at being on a council over there. So these men want to be close to power. They want to be close to power. They also associate with people who hold power. So one of the things about the appearing as an expert witness for members of the hunt is that it brings you into contact with people that hold power. So these people like to be in contact with people that hold political power. So my theory is that Dr Daryl Hamilton-Wallace has very much nurtured the ambitions of Jamie Wallis. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the political ambitions of these two, and I wanted to talk about the fact that the election in December 2019 was won by only 1,000 votes. So this is the bit that's a bit arcane, and it's almost impossible for me to go on with this without doing some speculating. So when we look at the overall vote share back in 2019, and we can see that compared to the whole picture in the UK, Wales is slightly different. In Wales, Labour got a larger proportion of the vote than they did overall in the UK. The Conservatives got a smaller proportion of the vote than they did in the whole of the UK. So when we compare the results of this one constituency, Bridgend, to the picture in Wales, we see that trend reversed, and we see that the Conservatives got a larger share of the vote and Labour got a smaller share of the result by a very small margin. And this could be explained by lots of different factors, because there could be demographic factors, that the social classes of people might be a different composition, there might be differences in wealth, there could be some great big infrastructure projects which have nudged the vote one way or another. But I just want to spend a moment to just invite you to consider that we just saw in the Brexit election, and previous to that in the Trump election, that there were bad actors coming into our political space and using data gathering to target advertising to personality traits that were associated with particular opinions. So they knew that to appeal to somebody who was a very emotional person, you would make a very different case than if you were going to appeal to someone who was very logical and rational. And that's how they targeted advertising during the Brexit campaign, such that it was more compelling. And the Leave side of that debate used these legally dodgy techniques of data manipulation. Now, I want to invite you to consider what happens when politicians have access to companies that do collect data about customers, about the information that we have on our computers, about the websites that we visit, and what that might mean for our political process. Now, I'm way off being able to give you any kind of definitive answers to those questions. I don't think I could answer them. with the resources that I have access to. But it does make me wonder just how big an impact that kind of thing might have. Because, of course, there were all sorts of national pressures going on during that election as well. But it's worth thinking about. And this is where character comes in. And I'm sure I share with all of you the absolute dismay with the character of so many of our politicians. And indeed, the honesty of so many politicians. It just seems like such a dreadful shame that something that's so important is so frequently debased. But how on earth do people pass vetting when they have close associations who are so dodgy, so distasteful, where their election agent has been convicted of violent threats and affray, where they've got a track record of going on into political positions and then just not turning up or quitting, where there are 800 training standards complaints against their company. And we've yet to come on to, I can't say it any other way, the sex trade, their involvement in elements of the sex trade. So that's the next section of the Jamie Wallis. It's turning into a bit of a saga, isn't it? So that's what I'm doing next, is the connection with the sex trade in terms of sugar daddies, lush dates and tie brides. So thanks for joining me for this third part of looking at Dr Jamie Wallis, the first trans MP here in the UK and a wonderful representation of the community. Please join me for part 4, which is a look at the aspect of this family which I'm most alarmed by, which is their interest in the sex trade. I can't say it any other way. So please do join me for that. In the meantime, take very good care of yourself. I'll see you soon.